Claude Code 2.0 with Sonnet 4.5. Have you played around with it at all?
I actually have, as a matter
Okay.
of fact.
Listen, it's early days, and I feel like over the weekend things are pretty busy. I'm not sure if you're having failing requests or slowness, but I certainly did. So this seems to be one of those things. I guess when newer models come out, one, they tend to be better than everything that was out there, top of sweet bench, et cetera, et cetera. The other is because they're popular. Sometimes the experience that you get early days is not the same as what it is long term, which we saw with GPT. I think 4.5 as well, or at least 5 codecs for sure. But this is where we are now. But I just want to talk about two releases because two things happened. So one
Mhm.
was the agent or the IDE, Claude Code, was bumped up to 2.0 and it got a couple new commands. And the other is the model that it uses by default, Sonnet 4.5, was also upgraded from 4, which is what we used before. So I think both of us were kind of on the Sonnet 3.5, 3.7, 4 track. Now it looks like a lot of people are in the same boat. So if you're using agents for coding, it feels like Sonnet is the place that a lot of people are sticking or staying, and it feels like this release is no different. So it's quite a bit better, but I think I've been noticing some of the growing pains at least over the weekend, especially when it comes to utilization. So unfortunately, I've run out of credit, so I can't use those today to demo. This is just my personal account. Obviously, we have a business account as well, but I will go through some of the things that I was testing prior to doing so. So first thing you might notice is that the Claude Code has a new icon here on the top left. And the version, of course, has been updated to 2.0.1. Now, I did look into the release notes trying to figure out why there was a 0.1 at the end. It turns out that it's more to do with the default models. So if you're using something like Google Vertex or maybe Amazon Bedrock, it might be that your default could be 4.5, but it's provided by a different provider. So they'll allow you to pick that provider, for example. Now, whereas in 2.0 without the 1, that wasn't an option. So I think that was the only thing that changed between the two. But there were some interesting things here in terms of commands that you could run. They're a little bit different than before. Now, one of the things I wanted to show is sort of just a session, like what I was actually doing. So what I was trying to do is use subagents. Have you played around with those at all? I know Whitney kind of introduced them to me, in fact, on this podcast, but I'm not sure if you played around with them as well.
Yeah, subagents are my new favorite thing. Actually, I've been doing
Okay.
quite a bit with them, and that was some of the stuff I played around with this morning. That I definitely want to share what I found. So yeah, I have. They're fascinating, and can't wait to see
Awesome.
them.
Yeah, listen, I've tried them in Code, cursors in VS Code. I've
Mhm.
also tried them in, well, the way Windsurf works is kind of like that, but I really actually prefer the way that subagents work in Claude Code, and they, as far as I can tell, don't work in OpenAI Codex CLI. So what I've been doing is trying to add other MCP servers to it, but in here you can see that I'm using a few different subagents. So there's a DevOps architect. Ignore me canceling all these commands, but basically I was trying to go through and assign a task to many agents. So there's a security engineer, reliability engineer, front-end architect, system architect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these were actually added, oh, my apologies, using something called, I'll see if I can find it here. My apologies. It is in this tab. Using something called Super Claude. Have you played around with it before? It's kind of like a framework to add things to Claude.
I haven't. No, I think you've
Okay.
maybe mentioned it to me before, but I haven't looked at it myself.
Yeah, I've been playing around with it quite a bit. Now, honestly, I think I was using subagents and perhaps the wrong way. So I would call a subagent to do a task and then continue on linearly. What I wasn't thinking of is that you could assign multiple tasks to multiple subagents. I think that was my big moment. We actually were just in New York together. You probably saw my screen where I was running like 9 things at once, and it was actually a little bit taxing to watch all those windows all the time. So it felt like having some sort of orchestration organization was better for that. And it turns out Claude can do that automatically, and I just didn't know it. So some of it was just that workflow. But I did want to talk about those agents in here. So it says there's, I think, 15 agents. And if we scroll down, we can kind of look at what they are. One moment here. So these agent systems here, there's a deep research agent, et cetera, but there's quite a few of them. And using these agents, I was able to divvy up the tasks essentially. Now, there is another version of an MCP server similar to this for others called Roundtable. I will, just a quick word of caution, Roundtable doesn't seem to have one, a license, which I wasn't too keen on. And the other is that though it does have these like add to cursor buttons, it seems like it might be a little bit vibe codey. So I would say if you're going to go down this path, it might be worth making your own. But imagine that you could call Codec exec or Gemini CLI or even Claude Code as like a little way to call up agents or commands. So basically that's it. So you give it a system prompt similar to the agents that we saw before, and it replicates it. So if you're looking for something similar to this, another IDE, that's the best that I've found so far, other than Cursor's built-in quote unquote agents or the way Windsurf does it, which I'm not a fan of. Okay, moving on. Now there are other commands in here. One of the ones that's been around for a minute is context, but I want to talk a little bit about the MCP tools in here and how much context they're using. So it's quite a bit. So the only thing I caution is as you're adding in agents like that sub agent one I was just talking about, that actually takes some of your context. And what I really like actually is being able to add them in as custom agents here, because you can see the amount of tokens that they're using is actually quite tiny. So it's more like a link or a pointer to an agent, as opposed to including all of that into your context, which is great because these days context is king. How much context you have or what's in that context window is really important in terms of getting the best results back from an LLM. Or if you're using multiple LLMs at once, making sure that they have the same context between them in order to look at it. Okay, so another thing I want to point out, we talked a little bit about that model. So if I go into this, my screen is going to be a little bit different than Jason's when we look at it. But on my end, so what I've got in the $20 a month plan is I can only pick 4.5. So I can't go back to 3.5 or 3.7. And if I want to go to Opus 4.1, I'd need to upgrade. So this is a little bit different than it was before. The other thing that I have seen but haven't used, mostly because I'm using GitHub and Git commits, is you can actually go through and rewind. So if I want to go back and rewind to one, like the context or where I was in the code, but keeping the code the same, I can do that. The other is if I want to rewind the conversation back just to the code level, but keep where I am, sorry, rewind the code back, but keep the conversation where I was, I could do that as well. Or I could roll back both at the same time, which is pretty interesting. The only other thing that I noticed was new, to me at least, was this status one. And status actually has a couple different things that I can do in it. But you can see here that if I go over to usage, we can actually see that I'm 100% full. Now, I'm only showing this just because I've been seeing a lot of complaints around it. It seems like maybe they're rolling out some changes to usage. I ran out of utilization in minutes using all these agents. So I guess what I was trying to say is there might be a little bit of caution where you're using a bunch of sub agents and you're on the $20 a month plan. I signed up through my iPhone, so it might be handled a little bit differently, but I have noticed the limits are quite a bit different than usual. And as Jason mentioned just before hopping on this call, like I'll probably swap over to the work account on the work computer just because I feel like at this point in time, it's great value. But a lot of these plans, when you're using the unlimited version, it feels like you get a lot more utilization out of it. I mean, one, that's obvious. But the second is what I thought I could complete in 1 or 2 or 3 shots before maybe takes a little bit longer. And as a result, it means I'm chewing into my utilization faster. And again, that's neither here nor there. It's early days with this model, but it feels like in order to get something done quickly, 3.5 is probably what I would have reached for in the past. And these days, it feels like the newer version is quite a bit bigger. Okay, so we talked about utilization. We talked about some of the new commands. I'm just going to quickly reintroduce one called continue in case anyone's forgotten. So when you're using Claude, you can use -- continue to go back to that same session. So if you did have something, you ran out of utilization, you had to come back and resume that session itself, you can do that no problem. And then, oh, my apologies, this is one of the MCP servers that comes with Super Claude, which is Serena, and it will handle things like your logs, for example, or trying to find files. So it gives you some of those tools that are pretty handy. But if we go back to our command here, I'm just going to quickly go into our MCP to show you what we've got. Oh, sorry. There we go. And you can see that these are the servers that I've added. So I've got Codex, which is a way for me to call Codex from here, which I've been using quite a bit, actually. It's quite handy. The other is Context 7, which I think I've mentioned before that I could never get working, and now it seems to work, which is great. The other is Playwright, which I've been using since day one. Sequential Thinking, I think, is the favorite that I've been using pretty much in everything I can get. And then the last one is Serena that came with Claude Code. But I think that's the main of my setup. I should probably remove some of these for different agents, but these are the ones that I use on a regular basis. Now, I ran out of utilization. I don't know what you do, Jason, when that happens, but generally I will reach for a different IDE now or a different tool or what have you, or perhaps OpenRouter. I think I've mentioned this vibe code web GUI probably a few times in terms of the sample project that I've been working on. This is what it looks like. It is a real thing. When I can get it stable for a good 5 or 10 minutes, I can turn it on and demo it to people. But in here, I just want to quickly call out something called Kilo Code. Now, I am in a web browser in Safari, so it's not going to open when I click on it. But Kilo Code is another way that you can access 4.5. The other is, as part of this release, and again, this is in a web preview, you can also run Claude Code in VS Code now, including in the website. Now, again, sorry, this is my code. It's running in Safari, and I'm currently testing Safari rendering bugs. So both of these, when I click on them, will be a blank screen. But I'll show you what that looks in a desktop app. So if we went to Cursor, for example, Kilo Code is here, and you can see on the bottom left, I can actually pick my model, and one of those models is 4.5. Now, Kilo is very similar to Rue or Klein. It's like a fork of those, and very similar to both of those tools. In order to get access to these models, they generally want you to top up. The nice thing about Kilo is they'll give you 20 free dollars, and this isn't a sales pitch or anything like that. But if you're thinking about using Klein or Rue code, Kilo these days actually might give you a little bit better advantage when you're trying things out. But to me, they all kind of look the same. The other is, and this is on the far right here, my apologies, I'll try to make this a little bit easier to see. There we go. Is we can actually run Claude Code inside of Cursor. And I think this works inside of Windsurf as well, but I got to admit, I was just using the model inside of there. But if you're in Cursor, and you want to use Claude Code the way that you do in the command line, that means with all that super code, all those extensions that we were talking about, you can use those as well, that exact same configuration inside of your IDE, which might actually be pretty handy, depending on like the size of the code base that you've got. The one that I've got is pretty massive. It's like this massive AI slot rendered thing that I'm playing around with, honestly, for testing and testing builds and code security, that kind of stuff. But you can see in here, without doing anything, my MCP servers, so sequential thinking, and Serena, the ones that we were just talking about, already were working when I brought this up. And then I gave it a task. I started running through, going through my the code base. I ran out of utilization pretty quickly on this one, but basically you can see it runs exactly the same way as it would in. I think a lot of us were using it in the terminal within our IDEs, but now it's actually a plugin. So it has access to the rest of the IDEs, my understanding. If there's like linting errors or what have you, you can add that context into Claude Code. Okay, so we talked about Claude launching Claude Code 2.0. We talked about Sonnet 4.5. We also talked a little bit about Super Claude and how we can add things in there, and then Roundtable if you want to use it elsewhere, or Kilo if you really run out of usage and need to resource something else. Now, I talked a bit about that card. I'll see if I can pull it up here. Here we go. So whenever a model is released, I just want to point out that there's a system card that comes out with each model. And if we scroll down in here, we can do things like look at some of the things that they're working on. And one of the things that I found in this model, and Jason, maybe you haven't noticed, but one thing I did not miss was the sycophancy, or I think kids these days will call it glazing. But I have yet to see, like, Jason, you cut straight to the point. Like, you cut right to the heart of the matter. Or, like, that's a great point, exclamation points all around. I'll say that the reason this really annoyed me was a lot of the times when running bash scripts, Claude Code would use exclamation points just before closing the parentheses, and would cause the bash to try to essentially read it as a string or some parameter expansion. It would cause problems all the time, and I constantly have to add to my memory saying like stop using exclamation points and get commit messages because it's causing bash issues. That's magically gone away, which is great. But I think the main thing is that it's no longer like a yes person. It won't just say yes or that's a great idea, or that kind of weird attitude that it had is gone. Actually, I've yet to notice it. Maybe it will be added back in. But right now, at least for coding, it feels like the right level of verbosity, I guess, and friendliness. So it gets the job done without adding a whole bunch of tokens on egress that just burns dollars and means that I can't use it any longer. So that was my quick overview. I've been playing with it for about, I don't know, 2 days. It's only been released 2 days. So since it was launched, I've been kind of kicking the tires. I haven't found anything other than the slowness being a little bit weird, and sometimes some of the tool calls will drop. But otherwise, it feels pretty good. I still, at least in terms of utilization, if you're on the $20 a month plan, you probably want to use something else right now. I'm sorry to say it, just because it does seem to chew through your credits really quickly, and it seems to have some issues in terms of speed. But It does look like it's the next, what do we say, state of the art soda. It's the next soda model for coding for sure. I think most of us can agree with that. It is fairly slow right now, but it's early days. And I would say that some of the additions to Claude Code 2.0 are awesome. I love having access to all the subagents that Super Claude brings in. And I think that's it in terms of an overview. So that all being said, I think that the command line is being updated. I kind of resized a little bit just to show off, but it doesn't do all that rejigging that it did before when I was complaining about it and showing off open code. It doesn't do that re-rendering basically in the command line any longer. The sycophancy seems to be gone, which is fantastic. But yeah, so far so good.
Great. Yeah, so far I feel the exact same way. The hype bot element of it seems to at least be tampered down. I have
Right.
not really put it to its tests, I guess, but that was something that was just unnecessary. I think at some point is how I felt. So awesome. Well, thanks for all that. Those wonderful
Mhm.
observations about the latest and greatest out from Anthropic and Claude Code and Sonnet. So we will talk to you on the next one.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks, Ryan.